Hello and welcome to another low budget Mr. Right video. This one is on enumerations and what they are, how to create them, and why you'd want to create them in the first place. So the key thing to keep in mind here is that an enumeration is just an enumeration is just a list of constants, right? That's all it is. We've worked with constants before and macros before, and what we want to do is now find a way to take those constants and put them into groups to help us manage them. And we've done stuff like this using like the constant integers in C#, and we've made macros in GameMaker. And this works, this is fine. However, there are newer, more modern, more kind of preferred ways of managing constant values. But this certainly works. So here I've just created three constants, red, orange, and green. And now instead of using the number 0, I can use the word red. Instead of using the number 1, I can use the word orange, and it allows me to kind of think in English more than in thinking in numbers. So what would this look like as an enumeration? Well, you start off with the keyword enum, and an enumeration is just a list, right? That's all it, the word to enumerate just means to list out. So basically what we're going to do is create a list right here. We are going to use the word enum, and then we want to give a name to our enumeration. So this is going to be like, what kind of constants have we just created? Are they error codes? Are they color codes? Are they enemy types? What are they? So this is the second thing that you're going to provide is the name of your enumeration. And then the next thing you're going to provide is the values or the names you want in your enumeration inside of curly braces. So there's the curly braces that kind of enclose or encapsulate your list of constants, and then notice that all the individual constants are separated by commas, right? So it's just a comma separated list. And here I've created constants named red, orange, and green. So there's our enumeration. That's what it's going to look like when it's done. Oh, all the spacing's a little off. Sorry about that. Told you this was a low budget video. So there's our enumeration, and now you may be thinking, what about the numbers? How do I give these things values? Well, by default, Visual Studio will assign values to these names that you have provided. So in this example, the first thing in the list gets the number 0, the second thing gets the number 1, the third thing gets the number 2. Does it have to be that way? No. You could redefine them any way you want. So here I've explicitly gone in and said I want red to be equal to 0, I want orange to be equal to 1, green to be equal to 2. This is what you get by default. You don't have to actually do this, because just by default, in your enumeration like that, you're going to get 0, 1, and 2. So this is kind of unnecessary. But the reason I'm showing you this slide is because you don't need to put it in 0, 1, and 2 here. You can put other values like 5, 10, and 15, right? And again, my spacing is off. So I could provide any number I want to these integer constants. You're not stuck with 0, 1, and 2. Or starting from 0 and going up by 1s. You can give them whatever values you want. So there's your list of integer constants, red, orange, and green. Okay, so now that you've got an enumeration, how do you actually use one? Well, let me just go back and just recap that an enumeration is just a wrapper around a list of constants, right? It's a way of taking a bunch of constants and putting them inside of a type. So now let's look at how we use them. So just before I even get to enumerations, let's just review how you declare a variable. Like here's our lowly integer variable, int x. So I have declared a variable called x, that's the name of our variable, and I've said that x is going to contain an integer. So I've got the name of the variable and the kind of data it contains. So an enumeration is just going to work exactly the same way. I'm going to need a name, like what do I want to call this thing? Is this stoplight 1's color? Is it stoplight 2's color? So I'm going to make a variable here, and I'm going to call it stoplight color, maybe because I only have one stoplight in my project. And then I'm going to say what type of data this thing holds, and it holds a color code. Remember, this was the name of our list. This is the name of our enumeration. So we've created now we've actually gone and made one of these things. Now we have a variable that points to or contains one of our color codes. So now how do we assign it? Well, now when we want to access that red, remember red is now inside of that color code enumeration. So we have to use the dot operator. This is the containment operator. Think about it as being the apostrophe S in English, right? So set our stoplight color enumeration, enumerated type to color codes red, right? So go into the color code enumeration and get the red value. Right? So because red is defined inside of our color code enumeration, we have to use the dot operator. And that's it. So that there's just a little bit of extra syntax that is involved in using enumerations. They look just a little bit clunky. For small projects, integer constants are probably fine, but you're going to see enumerated types definitely if you ever work in programming. So let's think about like why we'd want to do this in the first place. What's the advantage of this extra kind of adding a wrapper around the constants? Why can't we just leave them all as integers? What possible benefit do we get? Well, let's look at this scenario here. Here I have a color defined to be 0. I've made a color, I've called red, and I've set it equal to 0. And now I have another thing here called file not found, and I've set it equal to 404. Right, that's your error code 404, web page not found, right? So, and just notice that these are both integer types. So let's say I had some variable that was keeping track of a stoplight color. I could assign an error code to it. So the stoplight's value could actually be error code 404, which would be invalid for a stoplight, right? A stoplight should be, one of our 0, 1, or 2 colors, and we've assigned it an error code. And the reason we were allowed to do that is because everything here is an integer. Our constants are integers, and we're using integer variables. When you put things inside of an enumeration, you get something called type safety. And what will happen is that Visual Studio will not let you assign an enumeration to an integer, or one type of enumeration to another type of enumeration. It's an error. It won't let you do that. Can you work around it if you absolutely had to? Absolutely you can. However, by default, Visual Studio will not let you assign one type of enumeration to another type of enumeration. Right? So type safety is the reason you do this. Now, I would like to point out that you have already used enumerations and you just didn't realize it. So I'm going to pop out of Google Docs here, and I'm going to go open Chrome and go to MSDN and look up the enumeration for message box buttons that we used way back in the second exercise, and the first exercise, I believe. So notice here, we used a message box buttons object, and notice that that is an enumeration. So what is in this enumeration? Well, all the different types of buttons that we might want to create, right? So when we create a message box, we pass in one of these values to say what kind of message box we want, right? So we said, give me a new message box, and I want it to have message box buttons dot yes no, right? So we passed in message box buttons dot yes no to tell our little pop-up dialog that we wanted a yes no buttons on our dialog. So there you go. That's what enumerations are. They're just wrappers around a bunch of constants, and they provide you type safety. So if you have any questions on how to get that to work, or how or why you'd want to do this stuff, just let me know and I'll be happy to help.